So this is podcast number 8 of the Female Talent and Leadership Success Stories with Joshua from Linklaters. So thank you for joining. Just want to do a couple instructions of ourselves so everyone knows who we are. Then just run through your journey, how you got to where you are today, where you started as well. But also from a legal regulatory side, where you've been a lawyer out and out. The US, how they've adapted to regulatory changes and how they work with the regulatory advances against blockchain, crypto, and everything fun in between. What's kept you driven and what drives you the most to get to where you are today, and where we can do more as female leaders to enhance females coming into this particular area, as well as getting to management levels and even more so beyond that as well. So I'll kickstart us. So I'm Anna. I work for Intercrest. So we're a managing consultancy company. Now I'm based in Amsterdam, so I head up their European footprint with a focus on risk, regulation and compliance, and that's across the Benelux region, inclusive of Germany. Joshua.
Hi, thanks so much, Anna, for having me on. I'm Joshua Klayman, and I am at Linklaters, which is a global law firm. My role is U.S. head of FinTech and head of blockchain and digital assets, and I'm one of our global tech sector co-heads. So that's my work hat. I also have several other hats with respect, for example, to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. I chair the legal working group, and I'm also on the board, and I am involved in a number of think tanks and other industry ventures, including I'm a senior advisor to Wharton's Cypher Accelerator, which is a non-dilutive accelerator.
Wow. So that's a lot included into that. And clearly it's taken some time to build. So tell me about your journey.
Wow. Well, I guess it depends on where you want to start, right? What I would say is in the digital asset space, my journey started about 8 years ago. In my legal practice, it started probably a decade before then. So, if you would have asked me many years ago, in 2006, when I graduated from law school, was I going to be a digital asset lawyer? Was I going to be a regulatory lawyer? Or was I going to be a tech lawyer? I might have looked at you as though you had 3 heads because that was not what I was doing at that time. I was doing finance work, I was doing securities work, I was doing corporate work, right? And I had no idea what was going to be ahead of me. And so I learned to love everything that I worked on, but I really thought, if you would have asked me before I got into digital assets, how did I fit in? I thought bankers were my tribe, right? I thought that that's what that's what I did. I did loan agreements. I did other kinds of capital raising things. And then I discovered the digital asset space. And I really, after initially being a bit skeptical, because I wanted to make sure.
Everybody is.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to I think I had a little bit of defensiveness because I was afraid it was going to make me obsolete as a finance lawyer. And so smart contracts, replacing lawyers, that's what I was concerned about. But I swiftly thereafter fell in love really with this space. Excuse me. And I began going to meetups and conferences, and I got some early clients in the space. And I really found that the things that they were talking about, like the combination of finance with also game theory, was pretty amazing. And just the energy of answers, I realized, and honestly, the quirkiness of entrepreneurs sometimes. I realized, wait, this is my tribe. These are my people.
You think of entrepreneurs, and from way back when I even first started dealing with senior level people, that it's going to be very serious, really nitty gritty. And if you don't understand it, then you're going to get kind of stared at as the outsider. And they don't really have too much of, I don't know if I can say this, personality. But to be honest with you, most of them that I've met, they're really forthcoming and really inclusive. They've got a lot of energy. They want to get to know you, and they also want to support you. So I can completely see where you're coming from there. But I did butt in, so please continue.
No. I mean, I think that's really the overarching path. I think it's interesting, when I got into this space, I had thought, oh my gosh, I'm so late to this space, even though it was 8 years ago and it was still early.
Was it just starting?
It was, but you know what? I was afraid, oh my gosh, I've missed the boat. And I thought, I actually wrote something at one point, even after I'd been in the space a while, saying, I love this space. It's given me a life of the mind again, right? Like it's giving me imagination and passion and things like that in my intellectual life. But I wrote something like, I might not be thinking the big thoughts, but at least I'm thinking something, because I think, and what it's turned out to be is, just really, I know it sounds almost ridiculous to be this enthusiastic about an occupation, but it really is a passion, and it really is something where we can think the big thoughts, and we are thinking the big thoughts, and frankly, we have to think the big thoughts. So it's been really wonderful in that way.
I think you'd see it though, is where people start using, and it is almost like using your brain every single day, because there's so much to learn and so much to do. But you've done regulatory law from banking and kind of from a commercial side, and then moved into this space. You've dealt and seen the regulator as they've passed through all of these different eras, you could say. And being completely honest, like I said at the very beginning, my primary suite is Europe, so I can't comment too much on the US regulator. But what would your comments be in terms of their adaptation and willingness to work with businesses as the economies have changed?
That's a great question. And I should say, I wasn't always a regulatory lawyer, and I'm still, I still think of myself also as a deal lawyer, because that's what I was, right? So it really has been an evolution over years. But in terms of the regulatory stance in the US, I think it depends on the regulator, right? And it depends on the question. So I think if we had a limitless amount of time, I could talk about the various overlapping jurisdictions and whether there might be regulatory competition or, the challenges.
Deep dive now.
Yeah, like the challenges of, how do you know in which instance a digital asset will be deemed to be a security, in which instance it will be a commodity. And by the way, that's not a binary. It's not a either this or that. It could be both. Right, we have many regulators, both at the federal level and the state level, that deal with digital assets. So unlike many other jurisdictions, you can't just classify a digital asset based on its characteristics. You have to look at how was it offered, how was it marketed, how was it sold? So many other complex questions, and that's not even getting into like tax and sanctions and everything else. So I would say regulators are frustrated in the US, I would say. In my view, many of them are very frustrated because they feel that they've been clear and that the industry just isn't listening. Mm-hmm. Other people may have a different view, right? And certainly could discuss that if you'd like. But I will say part of the interesting situation right now involves they're also, apart from the regulators, the legislators and others, many people, especially given what happened last fall, well, actually starting last year with Terra Luna, right? And then the fall of FTX, and then the Celsius and the various other, the contagion that was being mapped, right? And then the bank failures, which although initially blamed on digital assets, now regulators are saying actually it was mismanagement and it was lack of oversight and other things, nothing to do really with crypto. But I think this has shaped a lot of the views of legislators. So, for instance, yesterday I was just at what was actually a historic hearing of the House of Representatives. It was historic in that it was a joint committee meeting between the Financial Services Committee and the Ag Committee, which makes sense because the question of security versus commodity, right? Among other things. And it was really interesting because one of the Congress people essentially likened the digital asset space to, and this is not my view, let me just say, and I'm paraphrasing here, but likened it to trafficking illegally in organs, right? Saying like, what, do we really mind that we're falling behind in organ trafficking to certain other jurisdictions? Should we really care if we're falling behind and if digital assets leaves the US? So that's one view, right? And then there are many other views where people really recognize the value of this space, the innovation, all of the promise, and how important it is to have a US market that is receptive to digital assets and where there are clear rules. So it really, there's a lot of push and pull, and some of it is politically based, like partisan. So
that's very true. And like you just said as well, the regulators think they're doing the best for the industry, but from someone that's in the industry, what would you say the outlook is back?
I think the outlook back, it depends, like the regulators would say, on facts and circumstances, right? I've been fortunate to have very good experiences with regulators on behalf of clients, some of which I've brought, for example, to the SEC's FinHub for years, and we've had, good results. We've had positive interactions. But I would say, it is not uncommon for me to advise people if they are planning to launch, a digital asset related project, to keep it outside of the US, right? Yeah. Just because of the complexity, just because of the, I wouldn't say it's uncertain what regulators' positions are, but sometimes it's unclear what the path forward is.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that is really something that we have to figure out. For example, just one small example, although it's actually a big example, is we know that the SEC has time and time again made clear its view that digital assets that are offered and sold for capital raising, that they're highly likely to be securities, right? Under US federal securities laws. Okay, so they also say, digital asset trading platforms need to register if they're trading securities, digital assets that are securities, and if they're allowing people in the US or US persons to access that trading platform. But what no one has said, and many have talked about, can you actually register? Are there impediments, things like that? But one of the things that people haven't addressed, and frankly, we don't know the SEC's position on this, is, okay, so say it believes that there are a lot of illegally issued securities that are tokens, and those are trading on trading platforms right now. Even if those trading platforms become alternative trading systems, right? They register as broker-dealers and then become ATSs or national securities exchanges. They would not be able to list illegally issued securities because they could not, an ATS could not do its diligence. So the question is, what is the plan for those digital assets? Is the plan to grandfather them in somehow? Or is the plan that they should never be tradable in the US, right? And I think, or somewhere in between. And it's questions like these that really, one might say, oh, it's a chicken and egg situation. We just need more ATSs or something like that. And then, the market will develop. But I think there are big questions that we just need answers to in order to properly advise clients. So I think that's what it's really like on the ground. What I would say though, is there is a ton of innovation happening. Builders are building, people are excited. And honestly, I also believe, and I'm stealing a quote, I'm paraphrasing a quote, a term from someone named Jason Gottlieb, who's a lawyer in the space as well, where he was talking about enforcement fatigue, right? And that because of all of the heavy emphasis on enforcement, it's no longer so shocking when there is an enforcement action. And so I think with the many, many, many enforcement actions that have been coming down and that I expect will continue to come down, while they are sending messages clearly about what the regulators' positions are, what I've seen in some instances is a shift from saying, oh, the regulator's enforcing against people, what does the regulator think, to, okay, what can the regulator actually prove in court?
This is where it's coming down to, and I think from the biggest shake at the very beginning of the year for America, with everything that we saw happening, I think it has brought a sense of, what is it they're actually putting in place, and what is it we actually need to follow, and what does everyone actually think of it? Because there's always that little grey space of, what do they expect? What have we done? And what do both parties want to do about it moving forward? Which is where I think the kind of collision of thought patterns both looks at. And if you take away the digital asset side and crypto area and just look at the technology, that's probably the biggest advantage of the entire space itself, is everything that goes behind the curtains. When everything else is put to one side and deducted away, what that brings to the economy moving forwards. But with the regulator stand, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just relating it to what I know from here, is in Europe they're trying to work with customers and also companies of, okay, this is new, how is it? They want to be educated, they want that little bit of support. But if they have a consistent pushback and a consistent challenge, and it's easier, as you say, to put it somewhere else and to put it in the US because of the whole, it's not that we don't like it, just no one knows. No one knows about it, and the regulator's a little bit unsure how you then envision that moving forwards. But then the adaptability side comes in of, it has to happen, but when? So then what do you do to apply to that? I mean, it must be such a challenging and frustrating yet rewarding industry for you to be in. What would you say kind of drives you the most? What's kept you in that space?
Well, I would say, and just stepping back for a second, like I think, the regulators who are in the space in the US, they are very knowledgeable at this point about digital assets, right? They've been involved for a long time. And they are highly knowledgeable about how digital assets work and things like that, which is helpful. And certain regulators, for example, the SEC has an office called FinHub, which is a cross-divisional office to deal with financial technology and digital assets. Lab CFTC exists at the CFTC, and there's various other types of things that I don't think I wouldn't say that regulators don't want to work with the industry, but I would say that they are frustrated, like I said before, because I think one thing, and if people tell me this is not clear, I disagree with them, okay? Because this is my view. I think it is absolutely clear that if you are using a token for fundraising purposes, right, to raise capital, and you're going to build out the token in the future, build out the ecosystem in the future, all this stuff with the money that you took in, that looks like an investment contract, right? If you're relying upon the efforts of others. I won't go through the Howey test now, which is the applicable test. But we know that is likely to be deemed to be a securities offering. And so I think there are paths forward in that regard, right? So you can treat the offering as an offering of securities. I have clients who've done this. We've also gone before the SEC's FinHub for years, talking about how once you're issued as a security, how you later may no longer be a security, right? By looking at guidance that the SEC's provided in the past. But what keeps me going, what keeps me excited, I think is just watching this unfold. To me, it's like a pretty exciting story,
It's part of the evolution side of it.
Yeah, and I know it might sound a little strange to say it this way, but if I think about, and I don't watch very much television, those who know me can attest to that, but shows that I've gotten into in the past, like Game of Thrones or something like that, right? You're always waiting to see like what's gonna happen next.
It's the cliffhanger side of it. It grips you in, and then you find it so hard just to step away. So I must say I'm not the biggest TV person ever. I think I was trying to say television, but words wouldn't come out. But when you get kind of hooked onto something, and I'm more of a series person where it keeps that little bit of you always intrigued, almost to know what is happening next. That's what would keep me interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination between that and with that, I will say, when I look at things, I'm like, oh, well, if I look at what the Fed's doing here and what the OCC has been saying here and this and that, okay, now what does this all mean together? So it's like, it's almost, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes, these theories that you develop because you have all sorts of data points, maybe there is a larger message, right? And you can kind of, it's to me, I always thought of the law, even when I was doing finance and loan agreements, I would think like, okay, this is a puzzle, right? And I think back to the LSAT and taking the LSAT before law school, it was logic games, right? And so thinking about, and frankly, with digital assets and blockchain, game theory and stuff like that. So to me, all of this sort of trying to make sense of the bigger picture as opposed to just focusing very narrowly is very exciting. But I think also the other thing that keeps me going and keeps me excited are just the relationships in the space. And I mean that
with very true.
With clients, but also frankly with colleagues in the space, whether they're at different law firms, whether they're at regulators, whoever they are. I really believe, and of course the space has grown tremendously in the past few years, but I really believe that those who have entered this space, I'm not talking about hucksters or scammers or anything like that, but say you're a lawyer, right? And you decide to go into this space. There's a certain kind of personality, I believe, that is drawn to the unfamiliar, to the new, to the creative. And I think there's a beautiful collaboration that is reflected in the industry, whether it's law, whether it's, any other facet. I keep coming back to law, obviously, because I'm a lawyer.
Yes.
But to me, that goes to the whole nature, not just of decentralization, but to, working collaboratively. When we have developers working independently to develop various code for various blockchains, et cetera, and ecosystems, apps, they're working independently yet collaboratively. And I think how I've always thought about the law, at least in the US in the digital asset space, is that we, meaning outside of the regulator and within the regulator and the legislators and everyone, it's all incremental learning. We're learning together. So, for example, if you have lawyers, right, you're building on what other people are learning, what other people's experience have been. And to me, that is, I don't know, I love it. I feel like it's not a job. It's not a job, it's a lifestyle.
It's not a job, it's a lifestyle. I really like that one, but I also completely agree. And to be honest with you, every single podcast I've done with people who are in the digital asset and crypto space has said exactly the same. I have never known people so much in one industry and emphasize the collaboration behind it from all different walks of life, from founders to graduates to developers to lawyers, how inclusive it all is of people, as you say, wanting to kind of help each other take that next step and almost being like the piggyback to get them there, rather than in a major institution. And we spoke about this before as well, of where it's a little bit like their knowledge is their knowledge and your knowledge is your knowledge, and we don't share because God forbid you know mine and then you know more. And but I think the days of that are gone. I think people are so much more in tune to generally just wanting to help other people. And we was having a conversation recently around, whether someone joined a bank, asset custodian. And the conversation was that you can join a bank. Banks are always going to be there. We're not going to get rid of bank, but a bank's going to be the forward front player. No, because everything is going digitalized, and you see all the bigger players kind of doing spin-offs now in order to actually keep themselves ahead of the game or buying into the digital asset area. And I said, if you move into this space now, it's not mature yet. It's still evolutionizing and there's still a lot to it. So then you get that little bit of being able to join the journey rather than join at the end. And it's one of those things where people, such like yourself, are hesitant at the beginning and a little bit, is this going to kind of dictate and ruin my career? Or you see it at the very end and everyone's kind of kicking themselves that they didn't join it sooner. But even if you look at it from like a legal compliance and also a risk perspective, what keeps you in that space? Because being honest, we don't see a lot of females, and we're starting to see more of them moving into the kind of governance area. What would you say has changed in that perspective since you started your career to now?
I would say there are definitely women out here.
Yeah, more now, but and, beforehand, there was always a majority male-led.
Yeah, I think and I do think there still is that that idea, right, about tech and all kinds of traditional, I don't want to say traditionally male, but even yesterday in the hearing, someone was referring to crypto bros, and one of the Congress people actually called out that on the testifying witnesses, they were all white males, right? And that, aren't there women who could be on this panel? Aren't there other diverse people of color who may be on this panel? And I think it's amazing, actually, that was called out in the way it was. And so
people are starting to realize it now.
Yeah, and what I've always also loved about the space, frankly, is because it's new and because it's developing, no one has been doing this for 30 years, right? No. It's not like, say, leveraged finance or something where, you know what, we know how that works. We know what market is, we can, and that's how you show your value. No, it really, the barrier to entry is low because it's still developing, and you can make a name for yourself. And I think, that's something I've always loved about it, because if you think about it at its base, blockchain is a database. Why are people so excited about a database? Well, because it's not about the database, right? It's something else. There's something else there. So yes, I definitely think there are more and more people coming into the digital asset space, there are more and more women and other diverse people coming in. But I think this is a real challenge. And I would say, often we say, often I'll say, come on in, the water's warm. We'd love to have you.
Yeah.
But it's just as much of a responsibility of the people who are already there to bring up and call out and give a spotlight to the people coming in. And I think, when you ask me about my personal journey, there's a lot of things, if you wanted to hear them, that I could share,
Absolutely.
I think what I would say is, if I think back just a little bit more, just so you have a little bit more knowledge about me, and then I'll talk about maybe how I think this relates to bringing up and bringing out more folks who are not, more folks who are diverse, whether it's because they're women or people of color or some other kind of underrepresented group. Right? If I think back, and I've talked about this in different contexts, so I won't go into it too much, but I had a somewhat chaotic childhood and young life, right? And I think part of that led me to seeking approval professionally and at the workplace, and also in my personal life. For example, my father, as I've mentioned in other contexts, he wasn't really around when I was growing up in the way that one might normally have someone around. And I remember always trying to show that I was good enough, right, in a way. And luckily, and I became very close to him later in life. And when he was a very old man, because he was much, much older when he and my mother had me, he had said something that I took as, affirmation, but looking back, maybe I shouldn't have taken it quite that way. Or maybe I should have thought, hey, maybe I don't need this approval. But I remember being so excited when my father had said, I'm so proud of you. I really never thought you would amount to anything. Right. And then I think about my brother says, he often puts me, he tells me don't take things so seriously, because he says, and this is a quote from him as it was from my dad, you're in the bonus round. Like, you were never supposed to make it this far. Like, don't, just enjoy. And so that's what I've tried to do. But I point this out just because there are a lot of drivers for people and there are a lot of limiters that are inside of us, right? Yeah. And I think some of them are external, some of them are internal. And I think for those of us already in the space and who have achieved some measure of success, I think there are a few things. And if this is getting too in the weeds, stop me, please.
Keep going.
I think one of the things we need to do, like I said, we can't look around and look for senior women and senior diverse candidates and say, where are they? Because you have to grow them. And part of this involves pushing people beyond their comfort zone, right? I have had mentors in the past including I had a mentor in the past who was named Mark Wojciechowski. And what Mark used to say to me was, Josh, how come I'm more confident in your abilities than you are? Right? And he would push me to talk on conference calls and push me really beyond what I was comfortable doing. And I needed that. Because if we look at studies of women and other folks, often like about who's applying for jobs and who's putting themselves out there, right? There might be 10 criteria. A woman thinks she needs 12 satisfied, and a man might think he needs 3, in order to apply it. Obviously, that's a gross exaggeration, but just knowing these sorts of things, and also knowing imposter syndrome, it's real. It's real.
It's
and
so real. At any level, I don't care if you're a founder or a C-suite, people get that imposter syndrome. And you say, and I think this really resonates with so many people, and it definitely does with me, of, where you felt like that from your childhood and you felt you needed approval. And then you think, I should never have felt like that. But that gave you that chip on your shoulder to keep that going throughout your career, because you've always wanted more and you've always wanted that seal of approval. So you've pushed, which has got you to where you are today, because it's given you that extra bit of oomph and drive to continue doing what you're doing and adding knowledge and that mental pushing you outside your comfort zone, which, as you say, is sometimes people get left in it and they don't have that little bit of nudge, which then sees them stagnate and plateau and kind of just carry on the same path. But people always have, and I'm a strong believer of this, always have a why they want to be the best, why they want to progress, why they're so career driven. And predominantly when you speak to those people, it's because of something in their childhood, whether they were told at school that they would never amount to anything, whether they were, seeking approval from their father and wanted that from life as well, because they kind of had that bit missing at the beginning, or whether they had everyone putting them down or didn't feel fulfilled and stuff like that. There's always a why and a concept. But that why is what gets people to where it is. And we need, as people, to not say, I want to, chief compliance officer, please bring me a woman. Okay, well, how about we start saying the names in open forums, like you said? How about we start bringing them in? How about we start taking medias to really big meetings so they can see how it works and can get that adapted knowledge at a more junior age?
Absolutely. And I think some of the things, just when I think about the keys to happiness, honestly, in at least professionally, but also personally, is getting to a point where you can give yourself that approval, right? Because and we all do this. There's a few examples I might just give, if that's okay. One is, when we think about what does our lawyer look like? What does our lawyer sound like? Right? Yeah. And you think about a stereotype, right? For a while, I know for me, I was trying to fit myself into that box. I wanted to have everything just so, right? And then I realized, and I think it's through others, helping me over the years to realize, actually, what makes you different? I know it's a cliche to say what makes you special, but honestly, that's your magic, right?
And whether when they say you have a special character because no one else is you, it's exactly the same thing as what you're trying to say.
And when we talk about personal branding, right, and this occurs in social media, but really everywhere. Sometimes people will be like, oh, that's too staged, that's too this, that's too that. No, that's your power. That's your power, and that's why it's so important to, well, number one, express yourself genuinely, right? But also, there's nothing wrong. If you want your name on something, put your name on it. Push to have your name on it. Push to have your more junior people's names on it. And this, again, is how we build up other leaders. Because, there's been a lot discussed, with diversity and inclusion about feedback loops, right? Yeah. And this goes back to the image and what you're expecting. So if you see someone and they're like, oh, this person looks like they know what they're doing, or this person looks like me, or something like that, you start giving the early assignments, right? And if somebody's getting good assignments from the beginning, good feedback, etc., that's going to end up actually making them better than someone who got fewer assignments, fewer good matters, right? And so that does lead them potentially on a different track. And it's because of, frankly, the starting point and what you've done to shape people. I think another thing, is the difference between mentoring and sponsorship, right? Mentoring, super important. You definitely need people to help you teach skill or to learn skills or hear things, get advice. But you also need sponsors. You need people with power saying your names loudly in rooms that matter, saying good things about you. Right? And that's why it's so important. Often we'll say, okay, well, this is a woman, or this is another diverse person, so let's give them a woman mentor or another diverse person mentor.
Yes.
Well, that's all well and good, but you also need people who are not in that mold, who may be the more dominant gender or more represented gender or other group, right? White men, I'll just say it, to be sponsors, because that's how you do it. You don't just, I think an important message, although I don't want to put it all on people who are women or other diverse groups. You need to have your name out there, and you can't just wait for someone to approve you.
No.
Right? You can't
good or bad. You should have your name out there, and it's never always going to be good. Sometimes it will be bad.
And on that, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what you just said, sometimes it may be bad. I would say one thing that was taught to me, not intentionally, but I overheard a friend of mine years ago in the digital asset space. His name is Marco Santori, and he was talking about the Streisand effect. And I didn't know what that was. But I have found that it is a very important thing to bear in mind. So the Streisand effect, I won't go into exactly what it came from, but something like Barbara Streisand was upset. The picture of her house on a cliff was being published, right? So she was trying to get it taken down, but because it was an invasion of privacy. Yeah. But all of that publicity trying to get it down had that picture shown more times than anyone would have ever. So sometimes if there is something, let it go. Let it go. And don't even necessarily, that's obviously your mileage may vary, there are different scenarios, but sometimes responding when you don't need to is going to call more attention to whatever it is you don't want to call attention to.
I said this to someone earlier. Sometimes it's about taking the emotional influence out of your response. Because as soon as something happens, you're so angry and it's a complete emotional attack. So you want to fire back as soon as possible. And if you take a breath, take a step back, take the emotions out of it and think a bit more theoretical, it mitigates a lot of crap that you're after it.
Exactly, because it will pass. This too shall pass. And you know what?
Days and everyone's forgotten.
Exactly. So I would just say, stay the course. I think it may sound hokey, of course, but there are some quotes that I really live by. And one of them is, I think it's a Japanese proverb, and it is fall down 7 times, stand up 8. You know what?
Like that.
That's what we have to do. And I think, as we go through our lives, we have all kinds of experiences. And I think it shapes us. And hopefully we don't let things tie us back in such a way that, we can't move forward. I think every experience that we have, whether positive or negative, it arms us in a different way. It gives us additional flavor and additional insight. And I just think, another thing I would just say is find good counsel where you can. And by that, I mean, you might not even like someone, but they might give you good advice, or they might have something that resonates, that sticks with you. I can think, and I'm not saying I didn't like these people, but I will say, some things that I gleaned, whether or not I like the people. One thing, at one point I was a very nervous lawyer when I was trying to, come up at a more junior stage. And I remember someone saying, Josh, calm down. The one thing, the thing that a client needs most is a calm lawyer. That was excellent advice. And I stick with it. And then sometimes another quote that I got was, and it wasn't directed towards me, it was directed towards someone else, But at the same time, I think about it a lot, which is if it's always someone else, maybe it's you.
Yeah.
And so
someone said that to me, if you're thinking the same thing about everybody, maybe look back at yourself, because there's usually a majority pushback. So I've heard that one before, and it's one that I actually really, really like. Look, just to kind of round this up a little bit as well, and I do want to push you for one more quote because I have enjoyed them. If there was something you could say, or a line of encouragement that you would give people to get into this space, to become a lawyer, to go more into the digital assets, what would your, having got to where you are today, having seen what you've seen, having been what you've been through, what would your words of encouragement be?
I would say that, and I've sort of said this earlier, which is, you know, this is a place where the future is being shaped and it's unfolding, and you can be a part of it and you can influence that development. Yeah. Right. And there's nothing more exciting in my mind as a professional, you know, endeavor than if I talk about being a lawyer. You know, some people hate being a lawyer. There are a lot of unhappy lawyers. I think being a lawyer, especially in this digital asset space, it is an amazing gig, right? Mm-hmm. Like you get to know the cutting edge of technology, of law, and people want to know your thoughts. Like you are literally being paid to give your ideas about things, or not paid. You could just be writing a thought piece. But you know, how many times, like in how many instances is having creativity, well, I guess there are lots of instances, but you know, within the law, maybe there are fewer opportunities. I remember someone once saying when I was a first year, I think, you know, no client needs a creative securities lawyer, right? Because you look at the precedent, you look at what the person's done. Well, guess what? You really do. You need a creative securities lawyer. And I think, to me, this is a space with endless opportunity. We are literally shaping the next generation of the internet. I mean, when we talk about Web 3.0, right?
Wow, we could do a whole new podcast.
Yeah, yeah, and I just think, why not be a part of that? It's amazing. And I will say, if I had stayed in leverage finance, I'm sure I would not be. Well, maybe I would. Who knows? Life is funny, and life is long, and life is strange. But I don't think I would be on podcasts like this. And, you know, otherwise, like somehow known in the industry for having some kind of ideas that people want to hear, right? Because it's an established industry. It's a great industry to have, you know, leverage finance, for example. I'm not knocking it at all. I learned a ton in it. But this is a chance where if you want to make a name for yourself, you can. And like I said earlier, your name is your currency. You take that with you, just like you take your reputation. And of course, you take it to whatever organization you're at, and you grow your team and things like that. But it's a place where if you want to stand out, you can, and you can take whatever that personal magic is that you have and, you know, and use it for the greater good. I
like that. Your name is your currency and you take it with you. I think that's one that I'm going to hold. That's going to be my quote moving forward. Look, if there's anything you want to say to kind of round us off, or I'm going to go into kind of leading it that way, is there anything else that you would want to add at all?
I guess the only thing I would add is, a lot of times, if you're anything like me, you may be waiting for the things to be just so before you do that.
Perfect timing.
Right? Yes, whether it's to take a leap of one type or another. And this can manifest itself in many ways, including for people who may want to start families someday, things like that. And so maybe this is a little bit delicate of a thing to say, but I would say if something is important to you in your life, you need to do it. You need to do it, and you will find a way to have professional success or whatever it is. You'll find a way, but you need to prioritize the things that are important to you. If you want, for example, to have a family, you need to prioritize finding a way to have a family, right? Instead of having it be an afterthought. Because if you don't, and this is just one example, right? And maybe I shouldn't have even brought it up on a female talent podcast, but I would just say, this is about life. This is about having a happy life. And there are so many different paths to personal success that whether it is developing a passion outside of work of one form or another, whatever it is, whatever you want your life to be about, you need to build it in. And so that's my last thing that I'll say.
And I would echo that, as there is never a convenient time, and there's never going to be a perfect time to do anything. So my little rule to live by is just bite the bullet. It'll fail, it'll succeed, but at least you've tried it. Because if you wait for a perfect time, you're going to be waiting until you die. You'll never do it. You'll never do it. So do it now and see. Because the only worst thing that can happen is you've trialed something and you can trial something else, but you've done it. Look, well, thank you for joining the podcast today. It has been absolutely amazing to have you here. And I find it so interesting hearing people's backgrounds, different motivations. I love your quotes, and some of them I'm definitely taking with me. But no, it's been really, really nice. And, we'll be in contact moving forwards nonetheless. But thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.